I've been getting paid $1,000 a month, if not.
$18.65.
Is it on? Somebody was asking a question. I feel like I need to whisper. It's really loud. Or put it further away.
Yes, Emily, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear whoever's talking to me. Who is that?
Yes, it's Kenton, the interpreter.
Oh, okay, yes.
Yeah, I was just asking if Adriana was going to be reading from a script or...
Yes, somewhat. Hold on, she can't see me right now. Hold on a second.
Okay.
I know she had something loosely planned. I don't know how closely she's following it. Okay, hold on a second. Sorry, the interpreter's asking me if you're going to be following the script. Yes, she's saying yes, she will be.
Is there a way she can share that script with us? Or
Can
I
you
assume we're
send-
voicing the beginning part, correct?
What was this last thing you said?
Are we voicing the beginning part?
Yeah, you'll be voicing while she's signing. Can you share that with them right now? Yeah, she can.
Tell her I said thank you.
Yeah. Do we have a laptop? Yeah, we can use a laptop in the back there. Yeah. So she'll send it to you then over email.
Perfect, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Done?
Welcome to OC Live.
That's right, we want to inspire all of you. And all kinds of acting, theater. It's going to be a great couple of semesters.
Once in a lifetime.
They are your friends. They are my family.
All right, good evening, everybody. It's wonderful to see you all here. Thank you for coming out on a Wednesday night. My name is Reiner Mack. I'm a professor here at wonderful Oxnard College in the art history department. And I have the honor also of directing OC Live, our premier lecture and entertainment series. You're really gonna be surprised and enlightened and inspired tonight. This is really an amazing program that we have for you. And before I kick us off, I want to make sure you know that we also have a wonderful program next week on October 5, on Wednesday. There are flyers in the lobby. Flamenco music and dance with our very own Wendy Castellanos-Wolf, who dances right here in Ventura County. And she's going to be here with a large group, Flamenco 805, as well as live musicians. It's really going to be a wonderful, wonderful evening, October 5, next Wednesday. Before we get started, I want to introduce our host for this evening. We're honored to have Adriana Nino here with us tonight to moderate the program. Adriana has been teaching at OC and VC for 7 years. She holds a master's degree in ASL education from Gallaudet University, and also a bachelor's degree in deaf studies from Cal State Northridge. She's an advocate within the deaf community locally, volunteering with Tri-County GLAD, and she's also a co-advisor for the ASL Club here at Oxnard College. Please join me in welcoming Adriana Nino. Enjoy the show, everyone.
Hello, hello, and thank you all for coming to Oxnard College. I'm so happy that you all are here to join us this evening. Today we will have the Dr. Joseph Hill. He's joining us through Zoom. And we want to say thank you to the interpreters this evening, Paris and Kenton, who are also here with us through Zoom. Thank you so much. So this is the first time we will be experimenting with a live audience while Zooming in the interpreters. So please refer to the interpreters on screen for your signed interpretation. And we're looking forward to working with them. As I said briefly, make sure that you look at the screen for interpreter access. So the plan for tonight, or tonight's agenda, will be the screening for the film Signing Black in America, which will run about 28 minutes. And it was filmed in 2020. That's when filming started. As part of Talking Black in America. So we had Talking Black in America, and then we began filming Signing Black in America. After watching the film for 28 minutes this evening, Dr. Hill will take the stage and present his work and his experience to you all. And at the conclusion of said presentation, we will open up the floor to finish out with question and answer. Please enjoy the show, relax. And if you have any questions while you're watching, write it down to make sure you get your question asked during the question and answer portion of the show. Thank you.
Our backgrounds differ based upon how we were raised. Some of us have been exposed to the Black Deaf ASL community. Some of us have had less exposure to this community. We have a unique way of expressing ourselves. Our race, our culture, how we feel is shown when we communicate.
People who use Black ASL typically show more facial expressions. I can see let's say their attitude or their personality, their swag. I can also see their body language and how they express what they want to say.
I can't imagine life without Black ASL. When I see Black deaf people in their element with each other, there's just a richness to it that is indescribable.
I've heard people say, I would like to know more about it. What is it? And it just shows that they're not aware of what Black ASL is. I can't be upset with them because they don't know, Because in the world where we use sign language, there's always something new to learn.
The number one myth is that it's universal, that a deaf person in China should be able to, for some magical reason, communicate with a deaf person in Nebraska. In the same way that we have manner of articulation and place of articulation and voicing or not and so forth, we have the same kind of things going on with signs. And so there's hand shape, location, palm orientation, facial expression, and so forth. Black ASL is one variety in that system. And its parts are used somewhat differently, which sets it apart from what white folks might do.
Growing up, I knew how we communicated using sign, but we didn't know what we did naturally was considered a language. But when I first saw the term Black ASL, I thought, it's like Ebonics. We use Ebonics within the Black deaf community. We have our own version of Ebonics.
Black ASL paints pictures and expresses messages in ways that just bring another layer and another flavor to the whole notion of what Black language is.
It's more flexible. It really draws people in and it includes us relating to each other soul to soul. I don't know how to explain it, but when people really want to connect with one another, when you leave a conversation where you've been in Black ASL, you have energy, you feel inspired.
Sometimes you can't even translate into words. It's just, you get it. It's not saying you have to be Black to understand. Maybe some areas, yeah. But it's you, your background, your upbringing, and the style people use, what they say, the accent, sometimes even dialects. Incorporated in sign, you actually see that.
Before the Civil War, there were no Black deaf schools in the South, for obvious reasons. There was no formal education for Black people in the South. And that included Black deaf people. But after the Civil War, we started to see the emergence of schools for Black and deaf people.
The war ended in 1865. It still took until 1869 for a school for Black kids to be opened in Raleigh, as a matter of fact. Louisiana didn't even have a school for Black deaf kids until 1938, and then it took them until 1978 to desegregate.
We had about 18 Black deaf schools, even one here in Washington, D.C., where there was segregated education. Due to segregation here in America, We saw the emergence of a different language.
The way their language developed in those schools was varied. They became very innovative with signs, creating vocabularies, creative ways of signing, and ways of expressing themselves.
I went to the Alabama School for the Negro Deaf. And then I moved to the school for white deaf students after integration, and I couldn't understand the teachers. The group of black deaf students together, we were lost in the classroom. And we didn't understand why. And so it took us time for us to pick up how white deaf people sign. There was a breakdown in communication. And that continued because it made the black deaf students feel less than. And that the white deaf students had better language, they had the better books, they had the better resources and schools and exposure. I started to pick up their signs because I thought white was right, white was better, white was smart. I felt embarrassed with my signs. So I put my signs aside. I picked up their signs from socializing with the white students. But later, my black friends said, "You sign differently." I said, "What?" "You sign like white people." I said, "Oh, I don't want to sign that way. I want to keep my black signs." I didn't realize what was happening. Later, I learned code switching. Black people seem to have character. I know that for me, I never sign in a box, like a picture frame. Our signing is a little bit bigger, so we're not the same. Our signing is colorful. It's really a little bit about your stance, your presence, your way of being. For example, I feel that Black ASL can be very formal too. But for other people who are really outsiders, like white people or non-Black people, I think that they look at it as colloquial or more informal.
There's this myth that white ASL is better and Black ASL is, not so good, which is ironic given that Black ASL is more traditional and more standard in some ways than white ASL. Older forms of ASL, you have lots of two-handed signs, so want, don't know, tired, and so forth, that in everyday discourse become one-handed. So want, don't know, tired, and so forth. Black signers keep the two-handed signs.
The signs that touch the forehead, like no, what for, why, oftentimes will move down from the forehead. We'll see the differences between the groups with Black signers signing higher on the head and white signers lowering their signs.
Older forms of ASL have very little mouthing of English, even though a lot of people were educated orally, so you get, with no mouth movement. And Black, especially older Black signers, show very little mouthing. So there's a way in which Black ASL preserves older forms.
Older people, if they grew up in residential schools for the deaf that were segregated, and we know back then the schools were segregated, they have their way of signing. They grew up that way. And I would ask them, why would you sign it that way? And they would tell me they had been in a segregated school, and that's what happened in the South. Often, people would repeat the same sign over and over again. I know that was one of the characteristics. For example, if I would say, "What's up?" we would say, "What's up?" maybe 3 times, not just once. So you would say, "What's up?" repeatedly as opposed to once.
As I grew up until the age of 7, I noticed that Black sign language was a little bit different. Like in the 1970s, I recognized there was a difference. Now I learn from white people. I don't even learn Black signs anymore. No more. Because we socialize so much with the white deaf community But sometimes black people use some of the old signs because many of the black students didn't go to white school. I'm not always interested in learning their signs, so I just go with what I know. Younger black deaf who are going to schools that are integrated, we don't see a lot of those segregated sign forms, so they're diminished in a sense. A lot of that older vocabulary starts to disappear.
The younger generation, I would say that most of them are from mainstream schools. Many of them are hard of hearing, so their communication style is different. It's a different presentation, a different variety of communication. The younger generation is more influenced by the Black community, from interaction with family, the community, church, public schools. So I think that has an impact on their language variation. Black ASL is evolving. Language evolves over time.
With the younger generation now, they still have something unique with African American English expressions.
So if you say, I'm going off campus to a restaurant, you want to join me? Yeah, I'm down with that. I'm down with that. It's the way that I'm going to go. I'm down, sure. Or you tripping. That's another one. You are tripping. You are tripping.
The Black deaf culture is growing really fast with the young Black deaf. They're making up signs all the time. I see like that, and that's like swag. And if you don't know what swag is, I have to come up with a word that you cool, or or like you have a kind of bravado about you. I have to know these words, so the interpreter's vocabulary helps convey information to them.
Perfect timing, secretary. No, come down. Don't walk away. Can't use that church. Can't do that.
And they also have gestural and behavioral tendencies that they adopt from the community, and they incorporate that into their signing style. Others will use sign phrases following the exact sentence structure, syntax from Black English. For example, I know that's right. And in sign language, you can just say, yeah, that's right, I agree. There's that sign that already exists. But you want to express a specific phrase. I know that's right.
My favorite one, anytime someone says something stupid, I'm like, boy, bye. I don't want to hear that. I ain't got time for that. Ain't nobody got time for that. That's another one. I really like using that one. Ain't nobody got time for that.
And with the Black LGBT community, being fierce, baby, you fierce. I look at that. Sometimes I see that.
Well, I have to add the hand snaps too. You gotta add that. Ooh, you are fierce. But then you gotta snap those fingers too. You have to throw that in. That's what really makes Black ASL different from standardized forms of ASL. It's like kicking it up a notch, but not only saying the word fierce, but adding body language, hand snaps, pursed lips, and the head tilt. It's not like we're even trying to do it. It's just in us, and the features are shown naturally.
I asked a deaf woman where she's from, and she said, DC. Well, normally people would just say DC. But she was kind of like DC, but with the snaps, well, she just did DC like this. And I knew immediately if I was to interpret that, I would say, if she's, I'm DC. Right. There is a certain, like I say, all that extra linguistic information that they put on the sign that you don't normally see white signers put on it. You go, what is that? And again, I think that's that whole identity thing. I'm from DC, I'm from Chocolate City. All those things are encompassed in that one sign, DC.
I think there's a whole lot that goes on the lips with Black people and on the face. What goes on the face with the non-manual expressions that would give a lot of communication that aren't necessarily signs. Like we'll do this with our finger and say, what? that like this. Wouldn't you all agree?
I agree. I think I see the sign black with 4 fingers. I think that's different from the one sign with the 1 hand shape. But when you see Black deaf people really signing ASL, it's loud in a powerful way. Black ASL is not just one language, one group, one dialect. There are many different forms, and it depends on the region in which one is located. Now, so far, we've studied Black signers in the southern part of the United States and their language development. But then, that's just the South. People often forget about geographical differences, and there are social factors that inform that variety.
Some people sign at a slower pace, others sign faster. I love the way people from New York City sign. They use a larger signing space when expressing themselves. When looking at them signing, you can clearly visualize and understand what they're trying to say. It's amazing. I'm from the South, and so some of my signs are different from people in the North. But some deaf people really try to criticize me, and I tell them, no, you can't. I'm from the South. This is how I sign. I accept your signs, but I'm not going to change my sign for you. I'm going to be me because I'm from the South. But it's the same concept for people who can hear. You know, when hearing people have an accent.
Sometimes in a fully white environment, sometimes I'm not. Okay, my posture, I have to make sure our pronunciation, something's right, while I'm sounding clear enough to make sure, okay, while I'm in Black culture, sometimes I'm just fine. I can tone down, just relax, not always have to be on the guard all the time.
Yes, Black ASL gets looked down upon. And 2, what they'll say is that Black ASL isn't nice or clear, or it isn't as explicit as mainstream American Sign Language. Black ASL has a history. It has a culture.
You can see the difference of my signing style and expression and theirs. I can be signing and they'll go, whoa, calm down. You don't need to get an attitude with me. And I'll be like, no, that's how I express myself. I'm just saying, maybe you express yourself differently, but there's nothing wrong with that, So I have to kind of bring it down sometimes.
If a student is from a Black deaf family, they can communicate freely at home. But when they go to a school for the deaf, where most of the people in the environment around them are white, they know they have to code switch to have success in that environment. Many people think the reason why there's something called academic ASL in school, that you can't use Black ASL because it's not formal. That's what people say. But I think that's a mainstream way of thinking and a mainstream way of viewing things. But internally, we know that it's not true.
Yeah, I agree with that.
But if you want to code switch to try to fit in with what they're saying in society, we have to do that.
With my Black students, I had to explain how academic ASL should be signed. I didn't want to criticize their signing, which is appropriate in a social setting. That's my dilemma. I told them that their signing was fine, but for the academic setting, they had to switch it to a more formal way. Their Black ASL signing was beautiful to watch, but to criticize it for the academic purpose, it just felt wrong.
As people of color in America, we have grown up in a society where to survive, you have to learn how to thrive in your home culture, in your home community, and you also have to learn how to thrive in broader American society. And so what that means in terms of the ability to code switch, the ability to still show your allegiance and affiliation with your home community, but also to be able to navigate larger American society.
The notion that somehow Black ASL should be looked down upon as less than, or that interpreters who come from that milieu and come out into the larger, profession to work, they actually have more that they're bringing, because they're bringing a bicultural communication level that many white interpreters can't scratch the surface on.
Part of why we call it interpreting is because we don't translate. We are not watching a sign and putting a word to it. We are watching an expression that consists of, quote, a sign, or, if you want to get a little linguistic, there's this lexical item, which would in English be a word. And then I see a sign. Well, there's not necessarily going to be equivalence between this sign and this word, because the facial expressions change it, the tilt of the head, all kinds of other things can have an effect on what that sign will mean in spoken English.
One time, here's a story. My wife is hearing. She's watching the interpreter and says, "Hey, the interpreter is really skilled. She caught your tone expressed through your facial expressions and matched you very well." I was pleasantly surprised, so I complimented her. That's what my wife said. Not all interpreters are skilled, though.
Yeah, that's right.
I remember going to an event. I'm sitting watching the interpreter. It was a white interpreter. The speaker was black. The audience was laughing at the speaker's jokes. I looked around and felt that I was missing something. I realized that there was a mismatch. I recognized that that interpreter was not understanding how black people tend to talk. I see. I think it's important to match the interpreter with who is speaking, speaker's culture and so forth. That's really important.
I think of like a Cornel West or Michael Eric Dyson, where you're like very sort of academic language one minute, and then next it's like homeboy from around the corner and on the block. And so if you don't know how to be able to interpret that effectively and interpret the cultural nuances that are there, then you're not going to be effective as an interpreter.
The independent, autonomous reach of black female identity was radiant in her rhetoric. She was black girl magic before there was black girl magic.
And also not to assume, right? So you look at me, and maybe people on the surface or very superficially will assume that I'm a black interpreter, and so I can interpret for hip hop. And really, I love Bob Marley. And I'm not like, I know who to call. I know I have to call Pam Collins or Tiffany Hill. If it's like hip hop, I'm calling my cousins like, now who is this? Betty Wap, Betty who?
Yeah, I don't know who
but like,
that
if
is.
you want to do Bob Marley or India Arie, I'm your girl.
I wouldn't say it's a matter of how black or white. It's what is your experience? What is your experience with that community? If you don't really know the culture, particularly in, for example, in a church. Churches, as was brought out earlier, is one of the most segregated places that we as Americans operate. And so the black culture is expressed very strongly within the church.
Here's what I need you to understand. There are times in your life when you doubt whether or not you're going to make it because you're going through a storm and you're up against the wind and you're up against the waves and you're wondering why you don't hear the voice of God speaking. Can I tell you that every now and then,
interpreting in that environment, you have to understand all of those nuances. You can't just listen to the words that they say. It's a lot of meaning packed into those words.
Mm-hmm. Or just, it's not even a word. It's just the energy from the pastor, from the congregation back and forth, and the congregation is watching you, and they're just picking up on that whole vibe, like you said.
I always look forward to going to church because it allows me to be me. Be yourself. We could sing.
And dancing too. I get into it. You're going to get that Holy Ghost dance. It's like a party. I'm really happy, filled with emotion. Let go and let God. You catch the spirit. Other churches,
It's
they're just sitting
different.
there.
Yes. For example, with the song Hallelujah. At the other church, a different church, this is the, Hallelujah. But what black people do? We be like, Hallelujah, Hallelujah. Yes.
Preach.
Black people be throwing tissue. Yes.
Amen.
Preach. Black ASL is beautiful. And it's rich in terms of our culture, our history behind the reasons it developed. And it's something that we hold to be very precious to us. I would say that I have a sense of pride with Black ASL. We have our own language. Of course, other cultures have their own language. Black people who can hear have their culture and language. I feel a sense of pride that we have our own culture and language with Black ASL. I want people to recognize this, that this is what we live for, to share our story and to show that our experience is valid. We can't keep denying it. What my parents had to go through, I go through it as well, but in a different way. It's soul, it's unity, there's history, there's culture. All of that is encapsulated into this thing that we call Black ASL. And that's the power of it. And I believe that we need to teach that and continue it every day. It's like we somehow are able to make it through everything that goes on. Language is an expression of being able to make it through all of that and understanding our values, our culture. Black ASL really incorporates all of that. When you understand Black ASL, you see us.
Hello, everyone. Hello.
Again, I hope you all enjoyed watching this screening. It was really, really, really inspiring. And now I want to introduce Dr. Hill. Dr. Joseph C. Hill is an associate professor in the Department of ASL and Interpreting Education at Rochester Institute of Technology and the National Technical Institutes for the Deaf. That is in New York. He's also Associate Director of the Center on Culture and Language and the Assistant Dean for Recruitment and Retention. His research includes, he lives in New York, in the city of Rochester. Please welcome Dr. Joseph C. Hill. You have the floor. He's going to share with you all his work and his experiences.
Excellent. Thank you all for having me here tonight. I hope everyone can see me clearly. Again, thank you for having me here tonight. I would like to speak a little bit about the film and some of my work as well. Again, I want to make sure that I'm clear for all of you to see. If you don't mind, I'd like to share my screen at this time. I'm sure you all saw me in the film talking a little bit about Black ASL. My hair was much larger at the time, and I've since got a haircut, but it's been a couple years since we recorded. I think that was released 3 years ago, so a lot has changed since then. Again, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the information regarding the project. We know that the film mentioned a little bit about it, but I do want to expand on certain aspects of this. I think it's important to know that there are a diversity of sign languages across the globe. I've attended many conferences and universities, and oftentimes there's a huge assumption that sign language is universal, which I often have to respond and saying that that is a complete myth, and that each country has their own sign languages, which also they all have variation within these sign languages. And a lot of people are shocked to find that out, which I think it makes sense because we know that there are variations in culture, which naturally informs the languages which make up those cultures. Thinking about American Sign Language or sign language and the transmission of that. We know that in today's time, folks that learn sign language usually learn in the classroom. However, in the past, they're usually transmitted through communities. So deaf people learned through the communities of which they were in, not necessarily through their families. And predominantly, these languages occurred in schools for the deaf. And it's important to know that most of the families were hearing, so that they did not have the language that the students often needed. So this continued for many years, where older kids would hold on to the language and pass that down to the deaf students or deaf family member that came after them. The first school for the deaf was founded in the state of North Carolina in 1869. There were other schools for the deaf, or white schools, that were founded much earlier than the school in North Carolina. Now in the South, the Black deaf students or Black deaf children didn't have formal education, whereas white students did, the white deaf students did. And that wasn't until the first school for the deaf, again, as mentioned, in North Carolina in 1869. Years later, we saw the emergence of more Black schools for the deaf. I know you can see the picture here. It might be small. However, in the South, we see, again, an emergence starting in Texas and other states in the South. The school in Louisiana was the last school to desegregate in 1978, where Black and white students were desegregated. And this was after a Supreme Court ruling, Brown versus Board of Education, stated that these schools must integrate. And so many schools, both hearing and deaf, were resistant to this ruling. And it wasn't until much later where schools acquiesced. Again, from that time, from North Carolina, for the emergence of schools, we know that Black ASL was prevalent. For linguists who study linguistics, I do want to name 3 folks. One is William Stokey. The second is Carl Kronberg and Dorothy Casterline. So Carl wrote the essay on Black American Sign Language. And later on, other scholars, one by the name of James Woodward, looked at Black signing in the South back in the 1970s. As I mentioned before, white schools for the deaf started much earlier than those Black schools for the deaf. And so throughout the years, the school in particular in DC had two schools, one for white deaf students and one for Black deaf students on one campus. And if you look at the screen here, you can see that segregation remained for many, many years, especially in southern states. And it wasn't until the 1950s where we started to see desegregation happening. So there is a 100-year gap between the first school for the deaf and between desegregation and segregation. Going back to the book that was published about American Sign Language linguistics, the three scholars that I mentioned, Stokey, Kronsberg, studied the linguistic features. However, I knew that the work that they did only touched the surface, but I didn't really hear much about a linguistic analysis on Black deaf people. Much wasn't published until 1986. Like I mentioned, that they were intentionally not including Black deaf people in their analysis. And if they did, the numbers were much smaller. So I think that had an effect on the research, or the research in general. So let me show you the numbers to be exact. In the 1960s, one book was published, which I showed in the previous slide, which is the Dictionary of American Sign Language on Linguistic Principles. Again, this was published back in the 60s, and it wasn't until the 70s where 4 other books, James Woodward, published more research on this. And it wasn't until 2010 when our work was finally out in the mainstream. This means that there was a huge gap in literature and after the Milan Conference, which after deliberation, it was decided that oral education was superior to manual education. It excluded deaf teachers from teaching American Sign Language, and again, must use an oral method. So we saw a need for the preservation of ASL. But again, as I mentioned before, the Dictionary of American Sign Language only focused on white deaf students, and not much research was done for the Black community, Black deaf community. After the work that me and my colleagues did, we see that much more has come out. But again, there's much more work that needs to be done, and we have just started. For the variations of American Sign Language, this was started in 1994, which included different states throughout the US, such as Massachusetts, Kansas, Missouri, California, and Louisiana. This was a huge project that included Black ASL. And the researchers noticed that there was a variation compared to their counterparts. If you look at the Yellow Book that was published in 2001, this was a more academic book. that focus on an analysis of the variation. Again, the variations between the states and the sign languages there. The Red Book was not focused more on linguistics, but just the variation. And we noticed that, again, Black and white signers differed. And that was an important factor to include. Unfortunately, I am not the only person that took on this work. At that time, I was a research assistant, and I was still working on my dissertation. The three other scholars, as you can see here on the slide, one of which is Dr. Carolyn McCaskill, who's on the top left picture, as well as Dr. Seal Lucas, Dr. Robert Bailey, and myself, as a research assistant, took on this work. There were other admins or other support teams on our team, and we all came together to put this research together. And again, to create what you see here. And this work has been ongoing for, I think now 15 years. There's actually another video that is published alongside of this book, which is pretty easy to find on YouTube. Again, this book is called The Hidden Treasure of Black ASL, Its History and Structure, which again, you can find on YouTube. That is a video paired to the book. So you are able to see that at any time. In the book, we recognize the variations of American Sign Language or Black American Sign Language. So we looked at some of the phonological variations. For example, one hand versus two-handed signs. So for the example of have or want, that would be signed with two hands from Black deaf people. And people think that if we did drop one hand, that it is often thought as lazy. But we know that the studies show that this was not true. It's just a variation. So regardless of age or generation, Black deaf folks often prefer to use two-handed signs compared to one. Other variations include location. So signing the word no on the forehead compared to on the chin, or signing the word for. Again, Black deaf folks prefer to sign much higher than standard ASL, which signed much lower. We also looked at the use of signing space, which was also mentioned in the film, is often signed outside of the box, right? We use a lot of space in Black ASL. Our findings showed that Black deaf, not all Black deaf people, but a majority of Black deaf people would sign using a larger signing space, whereas white deaf folks would sign much smaller. And this is interesting in our studies because we found that folks or white deaf folks who were much older signed even smaller, whereas the younger folks signed larger. And we came to the conclusion that there might have been an influence from the education system. So those who went to schools for the deaf versus the older deaf folks who were educated orally. So that was a unique variation. There are other factors that include sex, race, which the film will talk about. And we see that some Black deaf folks would sign maybe with their mouth closed, and others would sign with more of a mouthing assistance. Again, we saw a generational difference where more older Black signers signed with more mouthing and younger deaf folks did not. Also, the incorporation of African American English was influenced Black American Sign Language. So again, I will say that the signer's perception of Black American Sign Language, unfortunately, most deaf signers, or the older folks, went to segregated schools. So there was often a negative perception to those Black signers and the language that they used. As we saw in the video, we did notice that regardless of their perception, they still were proud. Some were still proud of the language that they had, while others might have not had the similar stories. But if you really look closely, you can see that Black signers did incorporate code switching to become more professional or to be perceived as more appropriate using a more standard sign language. As you saw in the film, we collaborated with folks in North Carolina who worked at the North Carolina State University. And there was a team, which was Language and Life Project, or LLP, that produced the different films or the different videos. They filmed different dialects and accents throughout the country, such as a Hispanic accent, a Southern accent, or an AAE accent. Now, it was not a part of their plan to include sign languages, but after showing a film to one of the team members, they decided that it would be nice to incorporate the work that we had done into their project. And so again, it was a really good start of a collaboration between us and folks at North Carolina State, which is the product that you see before you. So we were really thrilled to partner with them. And we were happy to see that this work was televised on PBS and nationwide. That is the conclusion of my slides. I would like to open up the floor to question and answers at this time. I can't see anyone asking questions if someone did come up to the stage.
Anyone have any questions for Dr. Hill? If you have anyone have any questions? I think I see a hand. Yes. Go ahead and stand up.
You can sign or speak, it doesn't matter.
I'm just curious, based on your research, if you think the way sign language is taught should change. Where do you see, the future of education of sign language?
I do want to clarify. Are you talking about the education of American Sign Language, or are you saying deaf education? Again, to be clear.
American Sign Language, the way it's taught. I mean, I'd be curious in both, just your thoughts about education in the deaf community and American Sign Language.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. We know that ASL uses a curriculum or has used curriculum for many, many years. And this has become standardized throughout the United States. And so it has been taught for quite a long time. If we want to teach something different, then it would depend on the educators. But oftentimes they're teaching based on their experience, the language that they used growing up. And so when we talk about Black ASL, it really depends on where, right? So if the teachers are Black and deaf, what would they teach to their students? Are they exposing them to the different linguistic variations? Again, we know that there's variations based on region, but not everyone knows about Black ASL. So for ASL teachers to get the job or to get a degree, they must be licensed or certified. And so it depends on the requirements that the teachers are to meet to get a job. You know, this requires money, it requires time in order to obtain a degree, which I think is an important factor. But for those who are Black and deaf, in order to get training or to go into a program, they're often met with learning standard ASL or having to teach standard ASL. So if they're a part of the community, if the teachers are part of the community and they want to bring the work that has been done on Black ASL, I think that would be fine. But I think it's really hard to teach Black ASL if they're not in the community. I mean, we do have ASL dictionaries where one could learn ASL, but there's no Black ASL dictionary as of yet. So again, I think because of the exclusion of Black deaf people in the analysis of linguistics and the curriculums that were built throughout the years, I think it would be quite challenging. Now, for future works, I think it would depend on, again, the teachers and how much effort they would need in order to incorporate this. So I think we have a lot of work to do. I think there's much more research that needs to be done. And again, it depends on the work that folks are doing in their field.
Are there any other questions? Okay. I, Adriana, do have a question for you, Dr. Hill. I was wondering, your experience, you know, whether it be personal, academic, did you feel connected to your culture, connected to Black American Sign Language based on your experience, or were you born and raised in the Black community and you already had that attachment, or was it something that you were, or were you born in a white environment and had to find your own way? How was your experience culturally? Can you elaborate on that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Before I answer that question, I do want to make sure that we talk about the range or variety of Black ASL. In this study, we talked about the segregation of schools and how those schools had their own sign language. So the students who went to these schools learned that. And so the schools in the South, which I'm not from the South, I'm from Ohio, which means I wouldn't know those signs, right? It wasn't until after the study that I found out more of the variation. The other forms are much different. Now we know that there are a lot of intrusions, English intrusions, and there's a variety of other communication modes, such as signing exact English, where some deaf people do learn that growing up. Even though my family is deaf, I do have deaf siblings, and I'm the youngest of 4. My parents did not use much sign language. They grew up in an oral school. So with that, I think, again, I did not sign much like my peers or much like my friends. I wouldn't say that I necessarily have a personal preference, but I just think that, so growing up, I didn't know, right? It wasn't until I got a formal education when I went to Gallaudet University and I saw folks expressing in different ways and using language in different ways. So again, before that, I could not recognize it. You know, it was based on culture, based on race, based on gender. It all varied. And I also saw that deaf people sign differently with other deaf people, where when they would with hearing people or with white people versus deaf people. Oftentimes Black deaf folks would code switch. And I think that is important to note. And so I had to do that even myself. But again, growing up, I didn't think anything of it until I went to Gallaudet University, particularly in the linguistics program, where I did start to pay more attention to that.
Go ahead and stand up. You have a question? Go ahead, get him a mic.
Who inspired you to do this film, and what made you decide to make this film?
Again, I did not do this alone. The University of North Carolina, or North Carolina State University, their Life and Language Project, they really started a lot of this. And so it just so happened that they asked my team and I if we would be interested in collaborating with them. At that time, we were absolutely interested. And so we had to look at what we wanted to publish. Was it a book? Would it be an article or a journal? Will we be giving presentations? So we had a lot of things to consider. And we know that Black ASL was not widely known throughout the country. And we, after collaborating with them, we knew that we would have to make a film based on the book that we created. And we wanted to follow the chapters. And so again, it wasn't just the book. I think we had this opportunity that was presented to us, and we knew we had to take advantage after getting so many requests. When we look at modern deaf culture, we had to answer. We had to really celebrate cultures. And one of the things that you may have noticed in the film is that the historical piece, where interpreting is clearly a factor for how interpreting is a factor for different sign languages as well. We know that interpreters have to match or meet those demands of the variations of sign languages. Interpreters who go through training programs are often white-based, right? Their proximity to whiteness is what informs many of the training programs. So when they're out in the field or out in the community, it's really hard for them to follow. But if you have an interpreter who grew up in the community, maybe outside of a training program, might be better equipped for the members who they served. So it does impact interpreters as well. The film did capture that Black interpreters did have this sort of innate culture in them where they're able to code switch at the ready. So that is definitely important, and I'm glad that that was included in the film. So I do hope that answered your question. Thank you.
Do we have any more questions? Anyone else? I do have a question for you, Dr. Hill, another one. I'm wondering if you can elaborate to the audience appropriate use, for example, you had a video showing, can you explain to the audience what the appropriate use is? And I'm sorry, the camera moved off of you in the middle of you signing and I wasn't able to see, I saw black. Okay, the appropriate use of black with the index finger or the B handshake. Can you explain the difference?
Absolutely. This is quite the topic that's been, it's been in discussion for 2 years now. Black deaf people do feel that signing black with the capital letter B is for Black deaf people or Black people only. And if you are not a part of that community, you should sign it in the more standard way with the index finger. And so that has been decided from community members for the past 2 years. As a sociolinguist, I do know that this does vary. So if we look at other states, maybe there are predominantly white people, they may sign Black with a capital B because that's just what they know. But now, because cultures do change, languages change with them. And languages change all the time. It is not frozen. For me, I do follow what folks are saying and what community members are saying in terms of the differences between the index and the letter, the B handshake for Black. Yeah.
Hi, excuse me. So we know that schools legally are not segregated, but in fact, despite the change in law, most are still as segregated as they were in the 50s racially, right? And so in American schools, Black students in particular, boys and girls, are some of the most disciplined, overly disciplined students, which can lead to things like the school to prison pipeline. So I'm curious about schools for the deaf, and do you see that marginalization extended into those schools for Black students, or might there be some sort of a protective factor with a more inclusive culture for Black deaf students in schools for the deaf?
I haven't seen much studies or documents or reports that speak to Black deaf students' experiences in schools for the deaf. However, I do hear stories, right, that things do happen at these schools for the deaf where they are excluded or they're over disciplined. And so, yes, that does happen to Black deaf students in these schools. I do have white friends that have adopted Black deaf children and sent them off to schools for the deaf, and they put them in the top performing schools in the country. And again, these are good schools. And they tell me, or they told me a few times, that the teachers have been punishing them excessively. And so they have to take them out of the school and sometimes homeschool them. And so that is a result of some of what I've heard from my friends. I can't tell you statistically what the numbers look like because I don't have that information. But yeah, that's been my experience.
Are there any more questions in the audience?
I just wanted to give kind of a response. Thank you. I think that presents us an opportunity, right, for research. So with linguistics, sociology, sociolinguistics, and a reminder to all of us who are advocates, right, for various racial justice, social justice, to always be inclusive, right, when we're talking about students of color in schools and their experiences, to think about deaf students, blind students, you know, all of the various diverse social locations that we inhabit. So thank you so much.
I do have a question for you. Since you're filming and documentation of Black ASL, what is your goal for all of the information that you have amassed? What have been some challenges that you have faced during this research process?
With the documentary, the goal really was to put this out there into the masses. After publishing the book, we knew that that it may have not been accessible to many folks because of the price point. I think it was $65 or $70. And so that was one limitation. We weren't able to get this out to folks firsthand. Presentations simply wouldn't be enough. And we had to consider traveling costs, right? So that wasn't always feasible. With the film, however, we knew that we could reach the widest audience as possible because it was public, and it would expose folks in different communities to the research that we have created or that we have done. Going back, if you see the book title, The Hidden Treasure of Black ASL, at that time, I was talking with a co-author, and again, it wasn't published just yet, but it was nearing publication. And so we were really going over the title of this book. We felt as though we found so much information and that this information was often overlooked or not really discussed much. And I did my studies at Gallaudet, which is a school for deaf and hard of hearing, right? And they have much history and much research, but they don't touch on any of the works that we did. So we knew that this documentary was a way, again, to show folks that, you know, in the hearing and deaf community, that we are here, that ASL has variation, and that it often has been ignored. And it is this, like we said, treasure, this hidden treasure. And systemically, we have been excluded. And so I felt like this was an opportunity for us to spotlight the language, and that it is not just made up, that it is something that we have had for many years. Again, we have seen several comments that people say that, you know, that this is a made up language, that this is not real. But it was a goal of ours to put that out there. We knew that they also were, that there were people that we wanted to film that weren't there at the beginning of our research that we wanted to include. And so we wanted to take action. We wanted to get stories from folks and look at their backgrounds and tell us where they went to school and see where what their experiences were. And we saw in the film that there were performances, and there were conversations that were archived or that were captured. Some of the folks were recorded in colleges, in different colleges, or in hotel rooms, or in different rooms or different locations. We wanted to get these people in their natural environments. That was the goal. We wanted to see them in their element.
Any more questions from the audience? Okay, I have one more question and then we will wrap up. Since you published your book and the documentary, did you receive some negative feedback, some positive feedback about the work that you did? What was your experience and the overall reception?
As I mentioned before, this has been going on for, I'd say 15 years now. And I think most have been positive experiences. Some folks are surprised or didn't know that that Black ASL is a language. I mean, other folks have said, even those in the Black deaf community that grew up in the South using Black ASL, they finally feel seen, they finally feel appreciated, and that the stories or the narratives that they've had growing up, facing oppression, facing discrimination on their language is now validated. And so in a way, we're including them, we're including more material, and we hope that this serves as teaching material for educators. So again, this has been such a huge positive acceptance. And this is an ongoing discussion, and folks are hungry for more. The team and I, some of my team members have retired or near retirement. And so it's really on me to continue the work that we have done and produce more information. So I'm figuring out a way to do that so that folks can get more information. Again, I can't do it alone. I do plan to work and collaborate with more folks, and I hope that other folks are inspired to do their own work. And this is just a way to start the work, right? There are people who have had some negative comments to say, saying that, again, that this is not true or this is invented. Other folks have said that we are causing a racial divide, which they're saying, well, Black ASL, saying that Black ASL and white ASL are different is a clear indication of a division. And so my response to that is that no, it's just acknowledging the fact and acknowledging the history. We need more evidence, right? Or excuse me, some folks say that the evidence that has been provided is not enough or that it's insufficient. So we do get some negative comments saying that the language is made up or that there's not enough research out there. We can't please everyone, right? For the most part, I think it's been widely accepted, and we've gotten a lot of positive remarks from our work.
Honestly, I think that your work is simply amazing. Sometimes we forget about our cultural signing styles. And often, as you said, we have to code switch in different environments. And I definitely can relate. When you run into certain people, you have to sign them in a more professional style. But then when you're in a more intimate setting, you can just be yourself and let it all hang out.
Right.
And that affects your signing style as well. And so like you had mentioned, for me, how do we break the necessity to code switch? And when I watched your video, I was thinking that I can't even break my own habit when doing that. It's something that will continue to happen. So I have to ask myself, how do we change that in the future? How do we instill different values in the future generation? And so I've learned so much from your work, so much from your documentary. I mean, wow, I'm simply inspired, and I'm so happy to have you here with us. Thank you so much for the students in the audience for joining us tonight. And thank you again to our interpreters for joining us as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Round of applause.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for having me tonight. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
So you can sign into the survey.